Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall. We're at Albertson Hall on the campus of Fort Hays State University in the Department of Biology and the third floor with the chair of the Department of Biology at Fort Hays State University, Dr. Greg Farley. And I guess we'd have to say some of his feathered friends, because we're going to learn about backyard birds that we can attract ourselves. Let's, if we could, revisit the Christmas bird count, first of all, though,
Sure.
Dr. Farley.
Sure. One of the other components of the Christmas bird count is some of the contributors don't leave their home. So there's actually a feeder count component to the Christmas bird count. So there's the field component, where we count in a 15-mile diameter circle. The circle is centered around Antonino, so Hays is within that circle as well. And there's also a feeder component, so individuals can count birds in their backyard and contribute to the national count at that level as well. They communicate with me by phoning my office or through email, and they can count the number of individuals of different species that come into their backyard on the count day, the 14th of December, 2014.
Dr. Farley, it seems like the backyard feeder event that people are participating in has literally exploded over the years.
It has. There's a Cornell University, through their Lab of Ornithology, has a feeder day where they've organized another large citizen science event where nationwide people count the numbers of individual species at their feeders in one particular day. And again, it's a wonderful large-scale data collection exercise. It also brings people into the scientific process, gets people asking questions, gets young people involved in science, and it lets people know that their observations can contribute to some very important national level peer-reviewed science.
What do we need to know to attract birds to our backyard feeders, Dr. Farley?
You have to think about the resources that these animals need, and there's a finite number of ways we could modify the environment to attract them. We can't, of course, directly change the environmental conditions such as temperature or wind speed, but depending on what you provide, you can make a very attractive world for animals to come in and visit. I think a very large attractor is water. Often animals will have enough body fat, but they need liquid water to metabolize that fat and turn it into a form of molecule that they can burn into, basically to make heat. So to shiver their way through cold nights in winter, birds will burn that fat layer, and they need liquid water to do that. So maintaining a supply of agitated or heated water may be the individually most important thing to have. In addition to that, feeding stations are also of tremendous value.
And what about feeding stations? Are there locations that in some areas will attract different birds as opposed to others? What about location settings?
I think it's location matters in terms of geography, where your home is. One of the real big contributors to the Hays Christmas bird count was Dr. Earl Carlson. For many years, Earl and his family would host us for the lunch compilation, and their house was near Lincoln Draw, and right after lunch we would walk Lincoln Draw and look at what they would have, and in the feeders in their yard you'd have very different organisms than you might have in a different or a newer development in town. So really proximity to Big Creek and to large older trees matters, and even just the microenvironment of the backyard, where the feeder's positioned. Is it to a location where birds can avoid backyard predators like the Cooper's hawk I'm holding now, or the sharp-shinned hawk, the smaller hawk to your right? These are both members of the same genus, and they regularly kill other birds. They're bird feeders. And they're attracted to the food just like the sparrows and other species we'll look at in a few minutes are attracted to the food and water. So if you can have an escape location near where your food location or water locations are located, so that's very valuable.
A little cover?
A cover, maybe a cedar tree, some kind of a pine of some type that's got, or dense vegetation, even if it be a rose, something with dense protective cover, usually is beneficial. Although I've seen this species on cold winter days go into thick rose bushes in my yard with intent. I'll put it that way, with real intent.
You also have to determine the type of feeder. I've seen flat feeders that are just basic platforms, and also the commercial type feeders that are the tube feeders.
So we've got both location of where the feeder is positioned and then the type of feeder you have. And the type of feeder will result in different kinds of species being attracted. Flat feeders are very good for attracting species such as this mourning dove. And I don't happen to have a specimen. Another common bird now in haze, just in the last decade, is the non-native Eurasian collared dove. It's a larger bird with a blunt tail and a small band on the back of the neck, and it's got a very distinctive very distinctive sound than the typical turtle or mourning dove that we know locally. So those birds will be attracted to flat feeders where food's readily available. You also tend to get large numbers of grackles, which may or may not be the bird you're intending to attract to those flat feeders. And a related kind of feeder, a different family of birds, but a related kind of bird would be this European starling. Now this is a bird in a different plumage, different time of year. This time of year the white tips have been wearing off, so our starlings may look more iridescent dark like this grackle, but the bill shape is the way to tell the difference in these two species. Those organisms tend to be attracted to the flat open feeders. If we go for tubular feeders, you tend to attract finches and other smaller specialist birds like this black-capped chickadee, who will take advantage of that harder to access food. And sometimes that's a better strategy versus a trough feeding approach to attract many animals, squirrels, to come in and just eat ad libitum. This is a better way with the tube feeders or the glass-fronted feeders with smaller access ports will really limit the rate at which birds are able to remove the food.
And we've also seen many of the tubes that are now squirrel-proof, if you will,
Yes.
where the actual feeding access drops down if the squirrel's weight gets on the feeder itself.
And it's tough to find anything that's truly squirrel-proof. Squirrel deterrent is often as good as you can get, but there are a few brilliant designs out there, which is at the moment defeating squirrels nationwide. We'll see what the future holds.
I was going to say, a challenge to be sure, Dr. Farley. Okay, and so what else will we see then?
I think the challenging birds for most people are this large group of little brown birds is what they might be called. And so you might get a couple of different species which look vaguely the same. I have two sparrows in my hand. This bird over here is the dark-eyed junco. It comes in several varieties. There are 3 different subspecies that we see in this part of Kansas, and there's different ages and sexes. So there might be as many as 6 different appearances of this bird. And so it can be very challenging for people to identify because it's small and somewhat nondescript. The other bird in my hand is a Harris's sparrow, and another challenge because depending on the age and sex of this bird, the slightly black cap you can see can be completely black, and the slightly black throat can also be completely black. So there's a lot of variability among individuals, and that can make for identification a little bit more challenging. So I think the sparrows are the tough group, and that's one of the advantages of doing the Christmas bird count is going out with someone with more experience, and you see there's different versions, just like the different versions of the 2 of us and 15 other people we could sit down with. It takes a little while to get a feel for what the variety might look like.
Well, congratulations, Professor. I just learned something else today, that the junco was actually a sparrow species.
Yes.
Didn't know that before, but easily to identify, and a ground feeder generally.
Ground feeder in that shape, that triangular bill shape, which is is a piece of anatomy for crushing seeds. Now, another great example, and I've held enough of these that I can assure you they can crush fingers as well, is the northern cardinal. But this is a tough identification of a northern cardinal. This is a female. This happens to be an adult female, but young birds of both sexes can look this way as well. This is a tough identification because it doesn't have that beautiful crest all the time, and it doesn't have the uniform red plumage. You can see some red in the tail, some red in the wings, a little red in the crown, but the giveaway is that very large conical bill. This bird is going to crack a sunflower seed open with ease, and that's another reason to have a variety of foods out there, is some of those seeds would not be accessible to the smaller species. So a variety of foods will bring in a variety of species.
And the flat feeders generally will attract the cardinals more readily than the tube feeders?
Yes, and often on the ground. And I have a a neighbor who's again, that's typical of bird watchers, who just makes such astute observations. And I was talking with Troy one evening, and he observed right on the money that cardinals come in at the end of the day. They're the last bird to visit, and they come in late and they feed on the ground. And so you have to be patient to observe them often, unless it's a very cold day, where they will be in the morning and midday as well, but typically the last bird to arrive. Now, one of my favorite birds to see in our yards in Kansas, but not at feeders, is the Cedar Waxwing. And I think it's one of the most regal or handsome. That's a very subjective assessment, but it really is a remarkably attractive bird. That mask, the very delicate plumage, very distinctive colors on the tip of its wings and tail, hence the name waxwing. You're close enough, I think you can see that's a very waxy appearance of the pigment. And these are attracted to fruits. And so these are the birds you'll see in large flocks in winters going to crabapple, mountain ash, hackberry, anything with a persistent fruit into winter. And they're just a very attractive group. There's a crest, which is why I thought of it with the cardinal. It's a bird you may not know, but it's a relatively common visitor to our yards in winter.
And if you have fruits of those kinds,
Yes.
crab apples or even the small berries and
Yes.
such, you'll be able to track
Honeysuckle,
them.
this is the bird that will visit, and they'll come in mass. It'll be a flock of 20 or 40 individuals where you'll have everyone there for 2 days and then no fruit. So it's just a case of opportunity. Now, I have a minute to talk about the woodpeckers.
Go right ahead.
I
Yes.
think this is another challenging group and very interesting group throughout
One of Jeff's
our state.
favorites because he has some in the backyard, I think, now.
Okay, and we have several different species, but for all woodpeckers, the diagnostic features would be that very strong, pointed bill, and it's pointy enough that I will not be puncture anything, but you will see it's a very distinctive,
Definitely pointed.
hard and pointed bill, and they also have a very distinctive stiff tail, and they use that stiff tail to anchor themselves into a tree, as you can see in this mounted specimen here. It's pushing its tail into a tree and using that as a fulcrum to hammer its way into wood to access insects. And we have a wide variety of species of woodpecker that spend the winter and breeding season in hays in western Kansas. This is the northern flicker. The male has that very distinctive mustache stripe. This is the oddly named red-bellied woodpecker. Now, since you rarely see the bellies of woodpecker, maybe something about his red cap might have been a better common name, but I did not name it. But the zebra-striped back is very distinctive, and even though hard to see, there is in fact a slight patch of red on the belly. But these are the two large common woodpeckers. We also have two smaller ones which come into feeders. The larger of these is the hairy woodpecker, and a very close relative is the small downy woodpecker. And the best way to identify these is this is maybe the size of a coffee cup, and this one is quite a bit larger. That's one way to tell. Another way is the size of the bill. If this bird was 100 yards away, it'd be tough to tell if it was coffee cup sized or not. This is a very tiny bill compared to the size of the head. This is relatively large. So we have at least 4 species of woodpecker that come in winter and will come into suet especially, and that's another way to add a component to your feeding station is to add suet. It can be bought commercially or rendered fat from byproducts in the kitchen, bacon grease with seeds in it. And you can make a very relatively inexpensive, very attractive source of lipid. They're very cold in winter. They come in for that extra fat since they can't access insects so easily.
And just basically hang it from a limb of a tree.
Hang it from a limb.
someplace.
I've made one out of screening, just waste screening for fixing something in my yard. Exactly.
Fascinating subject, fascinating topic, and of course, fascinating viewing. Dr. Greg Farley, Chair of the Department of Biology at Fort Hays State University, and the events of today's backyard bird feeding and attraction, our community connection. Thanks for watching.